I
Oh,
will add that in our college, when we are asking about teaching question, we will also ask a lot of behavioral questions, including like, what is your best day of teaching? What is your worst day of teaching? What are your strengths? What are your weakness? What kind of approach do you use to teach a certain topics? Or what kind of tools do you use? Or even to the point that we ask them to describe a case where they have a problem with the students and how do they handle it, or if a students like tell you that they are going to be absent for uh, for the rest of the semester, how are you going to handle it? Or if a student tells you that they have financial difficulty, how are you going to handle it? So we ask a lot of behavioral question in teaching as well.
I would say the one question that some people really flop on sometimes is, do you have any questions? The answer to that should never be no. And I don't care when you get asked during that in the process, whether it's at, the Zoom interview, phone interview stage, or by every single person that you interview with is going to ask you, do you have any questions? So you should have a bucket list of questions. And you can ask the same question to multiple people. They won't know. But the answer to that question should never be, oh, I don't have any, because like it clearly shows that you are not that interested. So I think that that's the one that a lot of people don't prepare for, or I don't know, don't expect. I don't know.
A lot of the searches I have been on are focused on faculty with pretty robust research programs or plans for research. So they're going to be asking you like to provide an overview of what your planned research program would be. All right. They're going to ask you about funding, either what funding you've had or what funding you plan to go after to kind of support your research. They may also ask you, so they may not, they'll ask almost like questions about mentoring. So they want to know how you will engage students in your research. So they might want to know like the composition of your lab, if you have sort of a traditional lab, or even if it's more of a social science lab. They're going to want to know, how would you involve students, graduate students, specific to the institution? If they only have undergrads, right? You need to know that and think about those pieces versus that if they have grad programs or even if they have postdocs, they're going to want to know, how are you going to engage all of the learners on campus in your research? So those will be pieces. I agree with the point around questions. So if you're don't have any questions, it kind of looks bad in terms of both how you prepared for the interview, but your interest in the institution. That ties to, we ask you always, why UNLV? Why do you want to come here? And even if it's not one of the key interview questions, it's going to be asked at the dinner or the lunch, or it's going to be asked by, someone that faculty that you're meeting with. They're going to ask that. And often another piece that informally is asked around that is they're kind of, a lot of times we're worried in terms of investing energy into a candidate that we're interviewing you, but you're not going to come, right? We might be really excited about you, and you need to know that all the faculty on the committee, this is extra work. We have to volunteer our time to serve on this committee. So we don't want people that don't want to come, right? We're pretty much like frustrated if we've given time and you don't have a real excitement and intention to come. So finding ties to, this is the right place to do my research. I'm impressed with the student population at UNLV. Even knowing if you have a specific area of research and there's either resources or a specific population that you recruit for your research, knowing like, I want to build ties with this community center. I want to work with these people in the lab, or I'm really excited that you have this state-of-the-art equipment at your institution that the one I'm leaving does not have. And this would launch my research in this space in a really unique way. So pitching to the committee, not just your kind of qualifications, it's like really showing your fit and your excitement to join them. And that is it's not always specific in the questions, but I think the committee is actually, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that piece, and it's not always explicit in how we ask it, because we have to kind of use these standard, kind of very boring questions that are just general, but we're always looking for you to tie like your fit and your excitement to joining us in that interview process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think, so let's say, the candidate has done a bunch of research. They feel like they know the institution, they know the area. They're walking into the actual like on-site interview, but they still get a really challenging question or something that seems out of left field that they did not expect. What guidance would you offer them in that situation?
I'm happy to. The first thing, and I don't want you to feel embarrassed about this, bring a notebook and write stuff down. You might get a loaded question that has like 3 or 4 parts to it, and you're gonna be nervous. That's expected, right? And we expect that. We know this is a grueling process. You're pitching yourself to us for a job, right? It's a big deal. But I would take notes. There's also nothing wrong with like if you answer part of it and you say something like I need to come back to this, or let me think about this a little bit more and I'll come back to it, right? Because we know you haven't gotten these questions ahead of time, and it could be something kind of more complex that you haven't prepared. So I would really recommend, don't be embarrassed about taking notes. It shows me you're like, right, it's a lot. Write those down, try to do your best with answering them. And yes, it's in a very short timeline. We may only have an hour. Sometimes it's less. I've seen 30 minutes, right, to go with this interview with the committee. So there isn't a problem if you get near the end just before you ask your questions and you now realize your response that you wanted to add, that you come back to it, right, before the end of the interview. So that's my best tip. And I love that someone's taking notes because I get it. It's a lot. So don't be embarrassed about that. You are not expected to remember everything. And we understand that nerves are going to get in the way a little bit. So just that would be one of my big tips for it.
I want to add to this conversation with when this actually happened to me during one of my interviews. So an aspect of the interview that we haven't talked about, and this might be more STEM specific or research heavy specific, where you have to do essentially a chalk talk of your research. So you write in the application process, you're going to write hopefully no more than 3-page and definitely no more than a 5-page document about what you plan to do and what you've done. But then you have to kind of like comps, like do it on the board with, and then drawing. And some people may have gone to your talk, some people might not have gone to your talks. You have to draw the data as well and all this stuff. And I got this question where somebody, I think, was trying to be provocative, would asked a question that was very controversial in the field. Like some people think one thing and other people think another thing. And it was a loaded question. And I just said it. I was like, oh, this is a rather loaded question. It's okay to acknowledge, and then just say, some people in the field think this, other people in the field think this relative to, what and then you can provide an opinion. I did, whether that was right or wrong, you just do your best, right? And you definitely can say, let me think about that for a second, and pause, especially during like the Q&A for the job talk component, like when you're talking about your own research. If you need a second, just like, when you give talks with now as a grad student, you can always pause, think about it, repeat the question, make sure you understand it, all that stuff. Use the skills that you've already been trained to do in grad school.
I would also add that I've sometimes seen, especially during the job talk where applicants are describing their research, sometimes they get detailed questions about some aspect of the research which is not on the slides and the applicant was not prepared to talk about, and they don't know the answer. And I think it is acceptable for them to say, I don't have that information right now, but I'd be happy to get back to you. And then you should ideally get that information, ideally within 24 hours, so that you can email them the information very quickly. So taking their question seriously as though they really want the answer and giving them the answer very quickly.
One other type of question I see some candidate having difficulty of is that their research may be on one topic, and then there will be some people in the attending your research talk asking about some research question on their own area, which may be only tangentially relevant to the topic that you are presenting on. And then, so my way of recommending my students to answer that will be that that's future research, and this is why I want to be joining here. The question is provoking, and then the question is interesting, and maybe this is how we can cooperate in the futures when I join the program. So that can also be one way. But I agree with all of the other panelists is that it's okay to not know something, but don't pretend you know everything, because if you are trying to pretend, that's the worst response ever.
Thank you all. Just another reminder to students on the call, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please feel welcome to raise your hand or type in the chat as well. And I'd like to go ahead and circle back towards an earlier conversation when Dr. Sim showed us the various levels of the interview process, and ask you all if you could share your thoughts on what or which scholarly accomplishments or activities should be highlighted at different levels of this process, and if there's any strategy behind that you recommend.
I think, sorry. I think in the application, it is more about the past, that things that you have accomplished, things that you have published, things that you have done. Yes, you have a session about research in progress, but majority of those are bragging about your accomplishment, things that you have already done. But then when you are going more on the later stage of the interview, when you're talking with people in fly-out, Zoom interview, you talk more about your future work. Looking forward, how are you going to cooperate with their people? Looking forward, how are you going to, what are some of the future research that you want to touch on? And what are some of the more work in progress that you are talking on? To the point that when my students go on job interview, I always recommend them doing a free paper approach of a research talk. Then one part will be that publication that they have already published, which guide to their ongoing research work, which guide to the future cooperation that you can have with faculty members in that university or that program. So I will say that your focus switch from the past to more future looking along the application process.
I completely agree with that. And there's one of the pieces I really think in terms of candidates, and something for you to really invest a lot of energy is going to be that like screening interview or Zoom interview. Typically they're like 30 minutes. So I encourage you to like really prep your responses and keep it pretty short. This isn't going to be an opportunity for you to expand on, right, all of the different research you've done, or even how great of a fit you are. Maybe there's some areas that you're working on that you haven't described in your application. You're just not going to have that level of detail. So I would recommend having some really, we've given you examples of some of the questions that might be asked, like why UNLV? What's your research program? What experience do you have teaching? Maybe how you would involve students in your work. And usually that's it. There's like 5 committee members, and there might be I don't know, like anywhere 30 minutes. So candidates that can really clearly demonstrate their fit, nothing about it, like you're going to be nervous still, but I would recommend practicing it so that way you don't ramble too much, and and just be like really focused for that piece. When you have the campus interview, there's more of an opportunity for you to expand and kind of talk more informally and really demonstrate your fit. But I think practicing for that Zoom interview is going to be the most important, because those that get moved to the next round are those that are like a perfect fit. So that's where you want to demonstrate your fit.
Right. Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
Alyssa, I was going to add one more thing. I think that we haven't really touched on is, there are also things that we might not consider quote unquote traditional academic things that I think could also be highlighted in your application. Like if you did outreach work, and like what communities do you prefer to do outreach work with, or what groups, and like what things do you like to do? It probably won't come up in the phone interview, and it probably no one will directly maybe ask you, but you can also highlight it just like a little, not a ton, like don't take a ton of time on it, but kind of again to show your interest in the area if there's a certain group that you like to work with for that kind of stuff.
Thank you. And use that as a segue for our next question too. So beyond outreach, is there anything else y'all would recommend that candidates share that is kind of outside of their academic accomplishments? And on the other side of things, is there anything that you absolutely recommend that they avoid discussing in these settings?
I think I can get start with it, and then other panelists can jump in. I think the one things that I would definitely recommend talking about is like they want to know you as a person. They don't just want to hire a working mobile. They want to know who you are as a human. So talk about your pets, talk about your the movie that you went to, talk about your interest in the time, in the student profiles, in the place, in the location, etc. Or even to some extent, if you are comfortable, talk about your family. We have one applicant that have a young baby, and he's talking about that. Oh, there's such fly out is actually really nice because I finally able to sleep. And when I'm back home, I have young baby crying. I'm not able to sleep. We all smile to that because we are all humans and can understand the interest of that. But I would avoid asking committee, what's your performance so far? I got applicant asking me that, and I'm like, what do you want me to answer? That you are doing it badly? Like, it is not a good time to ask that. Don't ask about your chance in that job because you should be confident in yourself, and not ask about like how you are or your chance. Don't ask committee personal question unless they initiate the discussion, and avoid politics and gossip.
Something I recommend avoiding is if you're unhappy at your current institution, or you've experienced challenges, maybe you haven't been treated in a fair way, or promotion has been, not on the timeline that you expected, or maybe you've had conflicts with other faculty members or challenges with moving your research forward, really anything that you might highlight these and we'll be thinking like, oh, we have those challenges here too. So maybe you won't be happy here. Right? So, or bad mouthing any colleagues where you share something, that's a really bad sign for us in terms of, and maybe we know that colleague. That's the other thing to realize. A lot of us work with each other. So I would try to keep your interview like very positive, a lot of, the highlights, and I wouldn't focus too much on negatives, even if you don't like the city or the location you're living in. All right. That can also even be, you would think that's not really personal, but if you're complaining about something and we're like, yeah, we have that in Vegas too, and you're probably not going to be happy here as well. Like you're moving from a hot climate and you're like, well, have you ever been here in the summer? Right? That's going to be like, are you sure you want to move here? Or you complain about your trip in, if we fly you in and you have sort of a hectic and maybe you're, a flight delay and some other pieces and come across and just are complaining about sort of the process. That's also, we want people to join us that want to be with us and will hopefully be happy. Right? That's a big motivation for us. So I would really recommend any kind of conflict or negatives to try to keep that to yourself and debrief with family or someone you're close to, after your visit or when you get a break versus doing that. And the other piece I would encourage you of just some of these etiquettes of like silence your phone if you're as much as possible. Try to have no distractions and such when you're having the internet, because that also can kind of give just a taste of your fit and interest in joining. So those are my recommendations.
All right. So we're getting close to the hour, but we do have one student question I want to pose to y'all. So do additional trainings or certifications like CHES contribute to a candidate's qualifications or decision on consideration? Thoughts do you have?
I know this because I'm a CHES, if that's helpful. So CHES is like a certified health education specialist. Strategy would be if that's actually called out in the application, that's gonna be a strength. I usually tell my students with certain certifications, right, it might put you ahead of another candidate that doesn't, but unless it's specifically called out as a requirement for the job, it may not really do much for you. It really just depends. If we're looking for CHES, yes, but if we're not, we might consider it, like this person has CHES and they're a really great fit, and this other candidate who's in our top doesn't. Maybe that is something we want to add to our faculty areas of expertise. So I don't think it hurts, but it doesn't necessarily move you to the top if it's not something we're looking for.
I would say to put additional certifications on your CV when you apply so that the search committee gets information about you having it. And then if it seems relevant to the position or to your research or to your teaching, then you could draw attention to it. But if it doesn't seem particularly relevant to the other things you're trying to convey and no one's asked about it, then you wouldn't bring it up. But you could always list it on your CV, and then the search committee is aware of those certifications.
I bet similarly, some institutions want, like in more of the clinical, they want you to be licensed. So bringing up any licensing, and they might even ask you questions about if you're coming from another state, exploring your willingness to get licensed in that state. So that might come up, right?
Absolutely. So in clinical psychology, there are licenses, they're state specific. And so the candidate should put on their CV and application information about what licenses they have, what states they're licensed in, or if they're working towards licensure, like how many hours of supervised practice they have. And it would be good to look in reciprocity between the states in which they have license and our state. Or the state where you're applying for the job, so they can see you're looking to get licensed. That's often a requirement for the job. So it's good if you know what's involved and can make plans for how that could happen.
Thank you all. So since we just have a few minutes left, I'm just going to close with asking you all if there's any last piece of advice or anything you didn't have an opportunity to share today that you would like to share with students.
Try to be with what's comfortable for you, like really warm, right? But not blurring, like, I don't mean warm in like physical touch or anything like that, but just like really inviting and excited, like really express your enthusiasm and your gratitude for everyone that's participating in the interview. There's just something about that feel that it really can set you apart from other candidates if they haven't done that. It's just something really welcoming. I think using humor when appropriate can be another way just to lighten things. I'm not saying like tell a joke that could possibly be offensive, right? But like lighten the mood, right? It's especially on those one-on-ones with faculty where you're going to see we're super busy and we are like cramming in the on-site visit into our schedule. So we might be rushing in, and anything just like warm and like expressing, I'm so excited to see you, or showing your interest in my research, giving each other a little flexibility. If someone's 5 minutes late, just being like fine with it, just like go with the flow. The interview is you've heard 1 or 2 days, it might be a lot. And just being flexible with that process and kind of having open expectations is going to really make your visit, but also your interactions with the faculty, just a much more enjoyable experience.
I certainly agree with that. I would like to add that they're interviewing you to decide if they will offer you a job, but you're also trying to decide if you want to move there and get that job. And so you may be concerned about some things and need additional information. I personally recommend you don't ask those uncertain, worried questions until you have an offer. Once you have an offer, and you're in negotiation with the department chair about salary and startup and equipment and space, you get to discuss all those practical things, but also you can discuss the other things you might be worried about. And that would be a good time to you decide if you want to go there, but do not put negativity into the interview. In the interview, be very positive so that they will want you.
I will add to that it is important to be positive, but you also want to be you, because you're going to be, if you get this job and you end up in this department, like these are your colleagues. So you want to be genuinely yourself. And I will add that, sometimes during the interview, you realize that this is not the right place for you because you see things, right? So being really aware of the fact that, yes, you're being interviewed, but they're also being interviewed, right? Like they will, we're all observant. We can see certain things that are going on, and it might influence whether you would actually want that position at the end of the day, even if you get offered.
In my opinions, I think I agree with all of the above, but at the same time, be respectful. Put away your phone. Like if you are in an interview, do not take out your phone at any time. Even if you are going on lunch or dinner, that's part of the interview. Do not check your phone during time because the committee members take time to interview you. It's a basic respect not to check the phone. I would also recommend that if you are going on-campus interview, be prepared of the climate difference as well as the time zone difference, especially if you are flying back to the East Coast. It's 3 hours earlier. Job talk start at like 8 a.m. in the morning. That's 5 a.m. in Vegas time. So do adjust for those physical requirements as well. Final hint is that there is cultural difference in applications. So what we are talking about here may apply more in US job, but if you are applying, let's say, Asian job, then some of the expectation and requirement may be different, and it is better to check like what is the local cultural expectation.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for tying up the workshop. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with our students today. We truly appreciate it. Other than that, thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.